get updates. So the weird thing about being the person who intros and also being the presenter is you have to start referring to yourself in like the third person. So we had one of our presenters we lined up drop out, and so I had in my back pocket, I was the first choice. That's what he told me, but I knew that was a lie. So I set forward with a set of some games and presentations that I had gone over with in a couple product camps ago. It's a highly interactive session, and at first it seems like something that just doesn't really make sense. Like, why is a game something that a product manager should care about? We'll talk about that. Too often, I think a lot of product management presentations and books are all very focused on, let me tell you how you're doing Agile wrong, or let me talk about user story mapping or wireframes. And I think it forgets a lot of the human component that's involved in being successful as a product manager. And games are good ways to practice that. So, the important part, of course, to start here is we're going to start with a very quick game to get you in the mood. All right? So, what I'd like to do is maybe stand up and sort of step back a little bit away from your table. Find a partner. So, the purpose of this game is, when you're getting together at first, you're trying to sort of shake off the mental cobwebs and you're trying to get things happening. This is actually a game from improv. If none of you have done improv, I highly recommend it. It will not only improve your ability to think on the spot, to observe others and be able to respond in the moment, it also has a very good focus around plussing, basically yes and, so a very positive mindset of building on top of other people's thoughts. And it's a well-cultivated skill. Little game here, very simple. What you're going to do is you're going to face someone else from your table, so two of you face to face. Come forward. And we're going to count to 3. Okay, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So you're going to do that, and you're going to go faster and faster, and eventually you're going to screw up. Actually, you probably won't in this first round, but you're going to screw up at some point. And one of the things you're going to do is when you screw up, imagine like the worst children's morning clown. Like you're basically going to go, "Ahooga!" And then you're going to start again. Let's try that for like a minute, and then we're going to kick it up a notch because there's a twist to all of this. Shall we? Someone doesn't
I screwed up.
2, 3, 2, 3, 2. Give it another quick round. Remember, Aru goes when you screw up. The more faster, better. Alright, we'll do one more stepping it up a notch. So one more. continue to use the snap for 1, but you're going to clap for 2. Alright, so This is good. 3. Oh no, come back. You get the idea. Alright, off you go. 3. And you can feel yourself struggling, right? And you're slowing down. You want to slow down, you want to go faster. Alright, last one. Come on, let's do that. So the last one. You're going to go 1, you're going to go 2, and then you're going to go 3. Was that easy? No. What was hard about it?
You use a different part of your brain.
Like you use a different part of your brain. What else? What else made it difficult?
You can blame the partner.
You have to use your brain.
Blame the partner.
What's that?
Blame the partner.
Blame the partner. So, Jonathan was pointing out, this is actually not only an improv game. If you've gone to Stanford's Design Thinking, they do, it's free. If you go look on their website, they have an event page. They have like a 2 or 3 hour design thinking workshop. And this is one of the first things they do. They do a bunch of little exercises at the beginning. One of the reasons that both improv people and design thinkers use a game like this is you're trying to basically prime people that it's okay to be wrong. So that's the reason we do the aruga. Everyone was stupid, and so it's okay to be stupid. So I don't know if you actually know this, but there's a whole line of research that talks about priming. So this is actually a form of priming. So if you've got a tough brainstorming session that you're trying to go into, we've all been in them, right? Where like, anyone got any ideas? No, I don't know. Something like this can really prime the pump. Sort of, hey, we're all here, we're having fun, you're all energy, you've been standing still and yet you're breathing heavy. I mean, maybe we should improve our fitness regime, but let's forget about that, that's a later problem. So this is something that primes you to be creative, to accept risk, to collaborate, all with this simple, like, let's do 3 things, 3 actions. Simple, it's cheap, there's no equipment. So priming is one of these things that when you put someone in the mood, they start to believe that it's okay to do this. There's a converse of this as well. So for example, they've done research that's shown people who, as with all behavioral economics and psychology tests, they put people in a situation where they had to write a test. And it was a test that had a lot of words that were primed with terms related to being elderly. And then what you did was you had to take the test and go down the hallway and put it in. And what they did was they timed how long it took for the people who had the test that were primed with all of these terms related to being old versus those who hadn't. Guess what happened? It took them longer. People who had been primed with words related to age started acting older. This game is the opposite. You're creative, you're fun, we're active, we're collaborating, it's okay to be wrong. Boom. That's what you're going to be in for the rest of the game. So this was actually just the preamble. This was the warm-up. I don't know if anyone knows Randy Polish, the last lecture. He was a professor at Cornell. He was a researcher in artificial augmented reality and virtual reality. Any professor, when they get to the end of their career, does a last lecture where they teach everything that they've learned in their career. If you've not seen this, I highly recommend it. It's an internet sensation years ago. One of the things you may notice is Randy looks a little too young to be delivering his last lecture. And the reason was that he was dying of cancer. Now, the thing that was most interesting I thought about Randy's presentation was he kept coming back to this one touchstone, which was what he called the head fake. So if you have kids or you've been a kid, your parents have done this to you, right? They put you in a team sport. Why did they put you in a team sport? Because they thought you were going to be a superstar NFL player,
They
NBA
wanted you to
player.
learn team skills.
Team skills, they wanted you to learn team skills. What were the other things they wanted you to learn? Lose. What was that? To get out of the house. That was probably a lot of it. Probably more of it. The less altruistic reasons that the parents perhaps did. Randy calls this a head fake, right? And the best way he sees for someone to learn something or to teach somebody something is to have them think they're doing something else. The game we just did was a good example of that. And the game we're going to play tonight, they're both examples of that. So the first thing, topic I wanted to talk about as a game was storytelling. So tell me why is storytelling actually important? Like in your role as a product manager.
Because people learn from stories. They relate to you, they have empathy with you, and they actually learn from stories much better than
Okay, so they can absorb it better, establishes a relationship, this feeling, right? A lot about connection, right? Think about your average campfire. You're out there, you're in the woods, with your friends, got a few beers, whatever. You're telling stories, right? You have the war stories about remember that time when. They're all about these connections. I think I said it one time, I'm pretty sure I stole it from somewhere, was like the only currency that you have actually are stories. If you think about it as a product manager, you can't code. Actually, well, maybe you can, but I highly discourage you from doing it. In fact, they put in security practices to make sure that you don't have the ability to go and push code. And so the only thing that you're doing most of the time, whether in written or in a verbal form or a presentation, is telling a story. A cohesive, beginning to end set of ideas that you're using to help them understand the world at large, right? And to help them understand their place. So, what are the things that make a good story?
They're timeless. Doesn't matter when you told them. Timeless, because even if it's from 50 years ago or 500 years ago, they still you can relate to them.
So they're timeless.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So they're timeless. So there's something that speaks to like a fundamental truth.
Right.
Okay, great.
hero.
There's a hero. I always like that. Yes, there's a hero. The audience might be the hero. In fact, in the case of some of the things that you're doing.
Emotions.
Emotions. Oh, I love that. What do you think about sort of the structure of what goes into a good story? And before you answer, I want you to think about every horrible party you've been at. With that person you were talking to that you just couldn't get away from.
It has an end.
It has an end. That's right. So that's certainly a good part. What else does it have?
Well, it usually has a beginning.
It usually has a beginning. There's an arc, right? There's a curve to the whole thing. We've all been in that situation talking with someone where there was this story and it kind of started here, and then it kind of meandered, and it kind of came up, and then it kind of petered off, and you thought, my God, are they still serving at the bar? And we don't want to be that person, right? And so a good story, a beginning, and a middle, and an end. And we have this in all of our lives, the stories that we go on, right? A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. And of course, if you know anything about Lucas, he followed, was it Joseph Campbell, who had studied all about mythology. This is why it's timeless and why it brings truth. But as product managers, we have the exact same thing. I was talking to a gentleman earlier who was talking about, he was doing an interview. We have the exact same structure when you think about this. Once upon a time, I'm glad you asked me about a time that I've overcome adversity in the workplace by convincing someone. Let me tell you about the time when I had to convince someone that we were going to put a fingerprint sensor in a phone. I had to show them that it was going to be secure enough. And so I went off and I got an independent research assessment. And as a result, they totally believed me and they put the fingerprint sensor in their phone. That's a really short version, but everything that, if any of you are looking right now at interviewing, it's exactly what this is. Beginning and middle and end, right? Once upon a time, there was a girl named Cinderella. Her father died. She had a new stepmother, horrible stepsisters. She was suffering. Then one day, along came the opportunity to go to the ball. She went to the ball. She went and had a wonderful time. And then what happened was she lost her shoe. Prince came along and found her. They got married and lived happily ever after. That's an interview story. You may not recognize it as an interview story, but it's exactly the same thing you're doing. And so the game we're going to play is called True Story. It's actually a group locally that came up with it. I think they were out of Stanford. And the structure of this is what makes it useful for you to break down what goes into a good story and to practice it. And again, this is a game. Now, this is one of those, socialist communist games where nobody wins, but it is a game. And so there's really a couple of pieces to the game. So there are some cards I'm going to hand around. Like each of these cards have just a simple prompt. So in this one it said, obsession, can't get out of my head, desire for your fascination, this will make it all better. Now that doesn't mean anything to anyone else here except you in this context. So you get two of those, you pick one of them that it resonates with you in some way, and then we go through different rounds in the game. The idea is that in the first stage, we're going to talk about just the setup. Remember those people who are in a party, they start telling you about a story and they're like, you're in the middle of the story. You're like, you don't know what they're doing, right? Hey, let me tell you, we're going to launch this new thing, it's going to be great, it'll make millions of dollars. And you're like, what the heck are you talking about? What product, whatever? Exactly the same thing in the story, right? Where were you? What were you doing? What did it look like outside? What were the, if you look at some of the examples here, the imagery associated with the setup of the story. This is actually really hard for a lot of people to do. One of the things when I played this game with other groups, most people play right by this into the next thing. And don't worry, you don't have to make notes. We'll come back to this as we go into the game. In the second stage, we go around where you're trying to actually expand that memory into a story. And so you're starting with the same thing you did in stage one, which was, hey, here's where I was, here's what was going on, here's what was around, here's how I felt, all those kinds of things. But now there's a turning point. If you think back to the fairy tale, the first phase is the once upon a time. This is the, and then something happens, right? Something happened that changed. But again, the part that's really hard here is you're not yet wrapping it up. That's where it comes to the third phase, which is, okay, here's what was going on. Something happened. What did it all mean? Why did it matter? Like, what changed? What was the fundamental result for me as an individual or for this person in the story, the situation that changed from, where we are now from where we were in the beginning? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand around the cards, and we'll go back to sort of phase one, and I'll guide you through each of it. This usually works best if it's groups of sort of three, basically because it's usually nice to have like someone doing it and two other people, and then it sort of balances off rather than one-on-one. And again, I want you to think back one thing. Remember Aruga, right? We're all trying to figure out how to do this, and so we're all going to experience this together. So let me hand around the cards, and then we'll go back to stage one. We'll go through this.
No, this one is
Okay, so maybe let's bring it back in. So first of all, I'm curious, how was that? Was that easy? Was that hard? That was actually a question. How was that? Was it easy? Was it hard? Did you struggle? Was it easy? What made it easy for you?
What made it easy was actually thinking about an actual experience and relating that to the card. And then thinking about all the details around that experience and using all the senses of seeing, touching, feeling, smelling, sound. You might have heard a big band from our table. I mean, we got it all.
Yeah, there was a certain amount of percussion there. What were so for you, that's what made it easy for you. What was it for others that were listening to stories that sort of, there was one that you heard probably, you're like, oh, that's really neat. What was it about the way the person that told that sort of image? What was it that made it compelling?
So this is actually her story, and she described the sunset in vivid detail. She was describing the sunset in Monte and there's cornfields that were waving in the wind, toxic things in the sky, and there was a lot of sensory details that she was talking about. It's really visual.
What's interesting is you remembered all. I played this game with a group one time, and there's a gentleman there who grew up in India, and he drew a card, something to do with childhood, I think it was. And he set the scene in the story of the smell in India after the first monsoon rain. Basically, there's this very specific, I guess, sort of damp, clay type smell. And that was actually this very deep, visceral memory trigger for him that he associated with childhood when he smelled that smell. And it was like, I'm sure you all, for me, for example, I'm Canadian, and you can't tell, that's part of the plan. Anyway, moving on. The thing I remembered when I last went home was I grew up in the Rocky Mountains, very rural area. My parents lived in, the sticks outside the sticks. And after a snowfall, there is a very particular type of silence in that area because there's all the snow on the trees. You hear nothing. All right, so lots more detail, vivid detail, really grounding it. What was hard about this? When you were doing this and you were kind of like, you were either struggling to start or struggling to stop. What was it?
So organize the words I wanted to use and make them interesting. I had the image in my head, but then I couldn't piece everything together.
Right. And if you think about writing a document as a product manager, why are we going off and building this product? We probably all had that problem sometimes, but we're in the middle of it and we're like, how do I get back to the beginning to explain this to someone who doesn't know anything about anything, right? We've all done it where we're suddenly in the middle in 3-letter acronyms and we've already assumed that you know everything about problem space and we're now, let's tell you how we're going to solve it. And that's when you have to stop yourself and like roll back. Make it a lot simpler. Okay. Let's maybe go along to stage 2. So stage 2 is this one gets I think a little easier for people because this is where most of the meat in a lot of the story, right? Lots of stuff happens. So stage 2 is essentially a continuation of stage 1. So what you do is you set the scene, right? 60 seconds, and then you got sort of a minute to 2 minutes to set like what changed, what happened. So the examples here, there's a turning point. Something changes, maybe you change, maybe the conditions around you change, and you're forced to react. Okay? Again, we haven't told anyone what it all means. Restrain yourself. That's actually, personally, I found one of the hardest problems with playing this game was your inclination. Most people, their natural instinct is they want to tell the full story. They want to finish the story. So restrain yourself. Pick another card. By the way, again, I see you all shuffling through and you're like, oh no, I'm going to talk about it. You can make something up. You don't have to tell us about your deepest, darkest, horrible thing associated with that word. Is that working? Okay. So let's do another, like about 10 minutes. we'll do sort of the next piece, which is stage 2. Pick a new card. And so you pick a new card.
Yeah, I want to know how the story is.
No.
That's one of the things. I'm at Cisco right now.
Okay, so let's kind of bring it back.
We just have market to go to Cisco Live.
Thank you, Brian. That was awesome. So, kind of the same question to the same one. What were the things that people did as they sort of set the scene and then they told what changed that made you pay attention? What was it that made you sort of lean forward as an individual when you heard it?
Some suspense.
Suspense.
Things going in a different direction than you predicted.
Oh, the unexpected. That old frontal cortex getting surprised. Okay.
Contrast.
Contrast. Can you give an example?
Well, let's see. We had Michael was being relaxed, and then he got the ballistic missiles warning on vacation.
Okay. That's a bad afternoon.
Anticipation of injury.
Anticipation of injury. Okay. It's kind of a dark element to the crowd this evening. Wendy?
Yeah, it's like the vivid description about something very special, and you anticipate something special will happen. Just we wait for that moment.
So the anticipation, the suspense, maybe the expectation of contrast, right? As you were telling your own stories, right? Where you know, it happens occasionally that you bore yourself with your own stories. Not often. What was it about the story you were telling that you found made you kind of like get excited or sit forward?
Personal story.
Something personal? So you,
Something you can relate to.
okay, so it was sort of a cherished memory or something that was
Still similar.
similar. Okay.
Reliving the moment.
Reliving the moment. In product management world, I kind of think of this as like, I write to think, right? So I essentially write a lot of words, and then I spend a whole bunch of time deleting a whole lot of them. And then to a certain extent, whether it's a presentation or whether it's having someone review the document, it's a little bit of reliving it, of the discovery of like, that's how we're going to assemble the words in the right way so that someone doesn't think I'm crazy. Okay, other things that sort of, Wendy?
I feel it's I know what's going to happen next, and they don't know. It's a mystery, and I feel I have a little bit of control.
A little bit of control, it feels good.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, but part of that is also, whether you realize it or not, you already actually know the story, right?
There's a hidden area, hidden area that's coming up. The people anticipate something, but their guess could be right or could be wrong. There's even imagination. There's a room for imagination.
And you get to control that. People don't realize, if you, anyone watch like a Chris Rock HBO special? Right? So he stands up there and he's very smart and he seems totally off the cuff and, oh look, he made himself laugh. Oh, he's such a natural. He's just naturally funny. That is bullshit. What you don't see is Chris Rock actually goes out for a year before he does one of those specials, and he goes to the crappiest, small, out in the middle of nowhere comedy shops and shows up and says, "Hi, I'm Chris Rock. Can I have 5 minutes to stink up the place?" And he goes up there with his little notebook of like, I've got something about fried chicken. And he goes out there to bomb. But his whole thing is he's sitting up there and he's basically figuring, okay, well, oh, they laughed at that word when I said it instead of the other thing. And his whole process over that year is essentially smoothing the story, finding the bits that resonate, finding the bits that don't. Most of you probably don't realize that you've done this, but you edit your life and your life stories like this all the time. Right? And that's actually where you get that, yes, I know what's coming because I know this story. It's new to them, but I've really got the parts that people care about and the parts that make people wander away from me at the party. Perfect. There was one other thing I forgot to mention, because for kind of brought it up at the beginning, like the totality of the image. So this is another improv thing. Improv scenes that really don't work are usually two people come up and they start talking about something else in the world, right? Like, we're waiting for the bus. I wonder when the bus is going to come. Blah, 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 blah. It sucks. The most interesting scenes, there's this whole idea of establishing the characters, establishing where you are, and a lot of it is, who are these people to each other? What's their relationship, right? Are they friends? Are they enemies? Do they know each other a long time? Where are they, right? Can we figure out where they are? Do they know where they are, right? And that's all part of this storytelling bit as well, right? That's why we do the setting of the scene, because whatever comes afterward will make no sense unless you do it. So I just wanted to make sure. All right, we're going to do the last bit, and then we'll shift to a different game, which will be easier and not involve surfacing deep personal memories. So, this is probably the most critical piece for a product manager. I joke with other people that say, what do you do? And I say, I'm C3PO. Right? My job is to translate a bunch of insights and things that I've seen into something you bloody well care about, in a language that you understand. Whether you're doing that in a presentation, whether you're doing it in a document, whether you're doing it in one of the best, most important documents you probably have to do it in, is your resume. Jim over here has this whole thing, and Jim's like, uh-oh. Reads a bullet on your resume, right? He looks at it, he asks himself, so what? Right? That's what stage 3 is about. Yeah. You went out and you had this experience, and Brian, yours was, I think you're playing flag football with your 10-year-old buddies in the backyard, and then you stepped in dog poop, squished between your toes, and all kinds of great imagery, just disastrously horrible, gross imagery. But then, now the question is, well, so what? Shit happens. Good night, everybody. Exactly. So, we're going to do it again, pick another topic, and now it's, yeah. Here's where we were doing this wild barbecue. I had a story about, Boy Scouts and building a fire, and the architectural perfection of a really crappy fire that wasn't working, and then someone had a wonderful idea to put some stuff on it, and it was gasoline, and it blew up, and whatever, right? So what? What did you learn from that? Were you ever allowed to go on a camping trip? Right? Think about it in the context of even your product story, right? Once upon a time, there was this market over here. It's really big. The world is changing. We see this opportunity. We've discovered this patent-pending, incredible piece of technology that will be able to address this need. So what? Well, we're going to go do it. We have this plan. We have the money. We're going to go and execute on it. And then the result we expect to be X. It's the same thing. Let's do another 10 minutes just on that, trying to bring it home. And as Brian so wonderfully showed, although you don't have to be that punchy, I think of it as kind of like the you see Timmy moment, right? You see Timmy, right? Lassie, like you see Timmy. Sometimes dogs fall down wells. That's what you're trying to get. What's the moral of the story? What did you learn? How were you changed by it? What would you do differently in the future? Okay? Questions? Okay. You do a new card? You may be running out of them at this point. How did this go? Was it easier or harder now that you got to start, explain, and finish the story? Was it easier? Was it easier or harder? Hands up if it was easier. Right. A lot of this comes back to, you got to get to the end of it. And when you think about microphones that have batteries that don't work, when you think about it, when you're constructing a story, we went through it the front way, stage 1 through 3, but really, if you want to think about something being an effective story, you really want to start with the end. Why did it all matter, right? And that's why I talk about when I thinking by writing. That's actually what I'm usually doing. I'm basically sort of struggling my way through the story until I finally figure out, oh, right, that's why this whole thing matters. That's what our reasons are. That's why it's going to change the world or whatever. And now I have to go back and sort of deconstruct where the story can support that whole arc. Back to what Wendy was saying about there's this expectation, right? Well, you got to know where you're going if you want to be able to build that expectation and resolve it. I'm curious, now that you've gone through this, I want you to think back to when we started this, before we even did the Aruga exercise. Now take a look around the table. How do you feel now versus when you started this whole process? You don't have to answer out loud, but it would help. What was that, Ron?
We're friends now, so
You're friends now. Were you uncomfortable in the beginning? I mean, he's not a threatening person. So you're friends now. Do you feel a deeper sense of human connection with that individual? Right? Back to something Carolyn pointed out. And why do you think that is? Because you've all shared these individual little stories and gone through this. That's actually one of the biggest pieces out of this is the process of going through the telling of the story and sharing stories. If you look at any book around culture and companies, right, think about all the companies that try to bolt on some cultural story after the fact. Nobody believes it, it's a whole bunch of hooey, but when it starts from the beginning, and there are the artifacts, the war stories that go with it. Remember that time Jim got so drunk after the sales conference that he was unable to, and yet he pulled that deal out in the end. Everyone tells that story again as part of the way that we're all connected.
Different
So.
Jim.
Different Jim.
Yeah, so I mean, what I've seen, what works very well is that particularly when I'm listening to somebody, if somebody kind of expresses some certain types of vulnerability, that tends to become more humane. I mean, somebody says, hey, I mean, I had problems and how you overcome it or whatever, right? And then it becomes more human story. If somebody always bragging about their things and does not show their vulnerability, that does not connect as well.
Self-deprecation,
Yeah.
right? Right, and even in the context of story, right? Someone was asking, like, moral of the story. How would a moral of the story work in a product management context? So a good example is there's a process within Amazon they call COEs, correction of error. Right? So something has gone sideways. Now we're going to talk about what went sideways and why it went sideways, and big surprise, the moral of the story, how we're going to make sure that that thing never goes sideways again in the future. That is the moral of the story in a product management or an engineering context. And some part of that is vulnerability, right? They call it in the company vocally, was it self-critical?
Vocally self-critical.
Vocally self-critical, right? Like, hey, Europe went down like Christmas Day. Well, why did it go down? Because we're idiots, right? Let me enumerate the 10 different ways we're idiots, right? And how we're never going to have that happen again because we're going to be much smarter. S-M-A-R-T, right? All right, we've got a few more minutes. You want to play one more game and it's nothing to do with storytelling, it's something completely different?
Sure.
Okay. 4 people said yes, so I'm taking that as you said. This is a game called back-to-back drawing. So I'm going to hand around some cards. They've got some very, very simple shapes. There are some Post-its. There are some pens. Hopefully you brought some more pens because you're product managers, and if you didn't bring a pen, you should be fired. So we talked about telling stories. Another element of storytelling is just communication skills, and it's both sides of that relationship. The person telling the story, the person who's sharing the information, and the person who's trying to figure out what that person is really talking about. So this is a really simple game. There's a whole bunch of these kinds of games, by the way, if you're interested, on teampedia.net. Whether they're sort of the icebreakery things we did at the beginning, or things for sort of active brainstorming. Back-to-back drawing is one example. And it's a really simple, like deceptively simple game. So the idea is I'm going to give you some little cards, and they've got very simple shapes. And I mean simple. Well, some of them are a little more complicated. Mostly simple, right? They're the kinds of things that like kids draw in kindergarten. Now the trick is, one of you is going to be describing this to another person. The other person is going to try and draw what you're describing. They can't see what you're describing. And, you know, you can't say, like, it's a circle. Like, it's a square. You're going to have to describe it in generic terms, you know. Oh, it's a closed convex shape. Like, you know, all of the parts of the outside of it are equidistant from the center of it, right? This sounds really stupid. It's like, of course I can describe a circle without saying circle. So it's a circle. No, wait, no, I can't say circle, right? You do this in a couple of different phases to sort of build a couple of different skills. So in the first round, person drawing, basic, yes, no, maybe. Person drawing, not allowed to speak. Right? So basically, they're sitting there, the other person's going to describe it. Brendon is describing a circle without saying the word circle, and I'm going to try and draw it. And when I think I've got it, right, I'm going to show it, and he's going to go, that has a few too many corners for a circle. The progression of this game is that you can do variants. We won't go through all of these. You'll get the idea fairly quickly, but now the person drawing can ask yes or no questions, like, hey, you know, is this side and this side parallel? Yes, right? Is the other side parallel? Yes. Are they 90-degree angles here? Right? So they can start to clarify, and this is where you start to build the other part of the communication. You've got the active listening initially, and then the active questioning, right? But again, you're constrained. I can only ask yes or no questions. And then you can do variants where, hey, the drawer can ask any question, which that can be dangerous because now is it a circle? Is it a square? Is it a rhombus? You're not going to do that. The final thing is normally you do this actually back to back, so you literally can't see the other person. But the final variant that you can do is you can basically look face to face. Now you're still not, you know, just not showing them what you're describing, but you know you can see what they're drawing. You can be reacting to it, and now there must be questions, right? Why don't we, I'll hand out cards, why don't we do maybe a quick round of the first variant, and then we'll sort of wrap up. Make sense?
Okay, let's bring it in for a minute. So, how awesome were all of you at drawing shapes and description of, were there any comedic errors? Were you all person?
Oh wow, that's close.
Okay, why don't you share what you do? Because I thought that was pretty fun. So, we're trying to describe this, which is, you know, if you can say it, it's like an equal sign, right? Pretty good.
The interesting part
was, I'm just going to stop it.
That's not the interesting part. So, the best part was first attempt. Yeah. And then she shared some more information. No. Were there other disasters that people had as they went around? Because that's what stories and connecting is all about. Tell us how things went wrong. And then we can talk about maybe how we can break it. So, who completely missed the boat on a description that someone gave them for a particular object?
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth. Oh yeah, come on. Let's see.
Okay, it was supposed to be a cube.
Okay, and what was the object? You know, it was a cube.
But my problem was I started out doing that. Because he said draw parallel lines and then turn it and draw parallel lines, but my parallel lines were so close together that it didn't.
Oh, I see. So you kind of like, it wasn't, and then you did get there in the end. So the funny thing is, when I did this with one event, and someone didn't have a partner, and so I wanted them to describe and practice their communication. So they described it to me. The worst and most embarrassing part of it was I knew what all the shapes were, and I still screwed it up. It's illustrative of a couple things. Describing things in very, very simple, accessible terms is really hard, right? Yes, I can talk to you about what a 5-point star is, but if I don't get to use the word 5-point star because you don't know what a 5-point star is, What am I going to use to describe it? This is the same problem you as a product manager deal every time. I can, of course, talk about the 3-letter acronym, but you don't know what that is or all of the history associated with it. I'm going to have to tell you that using words of 1 syllable or less. The other part that's kind of challenging here is when you start to get more complicated objects where there's relationships between them. Now you've got to think about, where was the one that was really tricky? There was one over here that was like, that one, yeah. This is a great one, right? So you've got sort of an inverted triangle, and you've got sort of 2 triangles along the side, and it's kind of, this is where you really, yeah, it's kind of like verbal charades, right? 3 parts. The first part is, but you think about all the techniques that you can use to describe this, right? Hey, it looks, kind of like, it's a square that has certain things inside it. Can you talk about it by decomposing another object? Can you talk about it by composing different objects, right? What can you add or take away? Which is exactly what you need to be doing in any of these conversations. It's like a database, but imagine you didn't have to actually run the server. Right. Ding, 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 I'll take what is the cloud for $400. This is a deceptively simple game to play. It's the kind of thing that you can play with a small team when you're looking for a very, very cheap way to hang out and have some beers and call it a team event. But it's also a way for you to very quickly and easily start to help some people who are maybe struggling with explaining themselves or being understood to hone some of those techniques. So I'm going to draw to a close there because it's like 9 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of your time. Was this a good use of your time, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're looking for inspiration, two sort of sources I might point to. You're looking for storytelling. There are wonderful podcasts. The number of podcasts are exploding. Some that I really love. The Moth is really more like personal stories. 99% Invisible it started off originally as like an architecture podcast, but it's about so much more about sort of like the things that underpin society and how it works. Freakonomics, I'm sure you're all familiar with the book. The podcast is always fantastic. And the reason I like especially those latter 2 for product managers is they're mostly about how do I explain something really hard in terms that everyone can understand. And how can I actually make that interesting? If you're not interested in podcasts, people that you might want to think about as authors. I'm a huge fan of Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis is the guy who wrote Moneyball. He wrote The Big Short.
Flash
Boys. What else?
Flash Boys.
Flash Boys, right? This is a guy who worked in essentially the derivatives market at Salomon Brothers. I mean, who can make mortgage CDO an interesting story? Well, that guy can. The same is true of people like Malcolm Gladwell and Steve Johnson. A lot of people deride them because they're sort of popular science writers. Well, how the heck are the rest of us without PhDs supposed to learn anything if there aren't people like this writing about, things that we can understand? Great examples, simple writers, powerful ideas, powerful storytelling, and a great example for you to follow. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. We will post slides, and so if you're interested, it'll have a couple of sort of the prompts if you want to try this yourself. If you've never seen it, there's actually a website called canigeta.com, which is used by improv people. When they're saying, can I get the occupation, right? Those can also work quite nicely as prompts. And similarly, if you want to do back-to-back drawing, the easiest way to do them is to go into PowerPoint and choose the shapes and print a bunch of them on a page, because that's exactly what it is. So very simple for you to pull these kinds of resources together and use them with your team, use them yourself. What I want you to do now, when you go out in the world, when you're telling that story, when you're making that presentation, start thinking in terms of these structures, right? Start thinking about how am I actually setting the scene before I start the story? How am I telling them where things go, the beginning, middle, and end, and why it matters? You probably are already doing that, but it's just a good reminder for you to go back to. Similarly, on the communication side, How are you using simpler words that people who aren't in your industry, right, can understand what it is you're talking about, for the love of God? Okay, thanks so much, everyone. You've been great.